glass that came off very teacher. It must be the glasses in me and the bun, which looks like I just threw it up, but it took like 2 hours. Welcome back to another episode of Jess Saying, the show where I, Jess, say stuff to you, lovely people, and sometimes it makes sense and sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes it's controversial and sometimes less controversial. Like we can all agree that pachinko is really fun to say. It doesn't have a lot to do with this, but I did see that there are 4 pachinko Tomb Raider games, and then I got distracted by the delightfulness of the word pachinko. Pachinko. God, that is so fun to say. Jessica, pay attention. But that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about how Crystal Dynamics saved Tomb Raider and then maybe killed it. I didn't put that in the title to begin with, but yeah, we might get onto that. So obviously Tomb Raider is one of the most classic and celebrated franchises in video games. Made a big splash on the PlayStation in particular, and the games released on Windows too. I didn't have a PlayStation growing up, at least not until the PS3, but did play some of the games on Windows, which you'd be like, oh man, that control scheme, but like quote unquote that control scheme was like, tank controls were just like the thing of the day. That just was what it was. It's like looking back at old school game graphics and being like, that looks shit. No, then we were like, this is real life. These are real dinosaurs. The game originally came to the Sega Saturn and the PS1, and it was Core Design who were making the games between 1996 and 2003. The last game they made, let's not jump into the last game they made, that's not fair. Core Design made some of the absolute seminal experiences, not just in the Tomb Raider series as a whole, but in all of video games. The Tomb Raider games that arrived on the PS1 in particular, the first trilogy were those real defining action platformers that many people look back on fondly. For me, I just saw Lara Croft as like, awesome. It was like, ooh, I play as a girl one. Like, it never occurred to me at the time, the conversation that was starting to be had and would ultimately be had for many decades about sexualization. I just saw a woman fronting a game, and that was a little bit unusual. Looking back, that is more the sentiment. I think the original kickback of like, ooh, you know, Lara Croft is a sex symbol. Now that we're in an era that I think celebrates that far more than demonizes it. I think millennials had a rough time growing up where that was seen as a bad thing. And now it's like, hey girl, you do you. Get it with your dual pistols. So I think there was a huge celebration from that side of things, and her being, you know, one of like the coolest characters, probably right next to Samus, as like these were the defining like sick badass female characters, and they got to live in the same space as Master Chief and Nathan Drake, and that shit was the best. And not only that, the games were a hell of a lot of fun. Like the worlds were exciting to explore. Dinosaurs, man, they're also scary. They were really scary. But by and large, Core Design were doing a lot of things that were establishing these, I can't help myself, core experiences for a lot of millennials growing up. And it's a shame if you missed those ones. They have been remastered now. And then it was 2003 and Angel of Darkness came out, and it was not the pinnacle of what video games could be. It was kind of the opposite. It was like, you know, it was the first Tomb Raider game that came out on the PS2, and it was getting to a point where better was expected, and it was like Tomb Raider hadn't really taken that step forward with everybody else, and that ended up being the last game that Core Design did in their big first sweep of taking every single Tomb Raider game through the development stages, and it's you hate seeing anybody go out like that, and so yeah, that was sort of the 2003 legacy of Tomb Raider. And then Crystal Dynamics came in 2006, so they came in and created Tomb Raider Legend that came to PS2, PS3, Xbox 360, GameCube, and things sort of got on the mend. That was received pretty well. So was Anniversary, so was Underworld. Weirdly, one of the best, probably the best received Tomb Raider game was the mobile game. If you remember, Lara Croft and the Guardian of Light that came out in 2010 was an absolute slam dunk. It's a little controversial talking about the Crystal Dynamics Tomb Raider games because obviously getting everything going for defining who Lara Croft was, what was this brand, like what is the soul, the heart and soul of what Tomb Raider is as far as its story, its vibe, its gameplay. And it's always a dice roll when somebody else comes in to take it in a different direction, especially since they were basically digging up the corpse that was Tomb Raider, since it was buried 6 feet under by Angel of Darkness. They were basically trying to breathe life into this thing. But they did a hell of a good job with the first trilogy that followed. It was pretty much all of the games in that trilogy were received fairly well. We're talking 8 out of 10s, some 7 out of 10s. But what really hit as a slam dunk was the game that I remember playing on mobile, Lara Croft and the Guardian of Light. This was like Crystal Dynamics' first experiment with just, can we walk in a totally different direction? Can we take one of the most iconic characters and franchises in the history of video games, step to the side, and not piss everybody off? Like, if we do this well, if we do this right, in a way where it doesn't feel like we're betraying the franchise. It doesn't feel like we're betraying the fans who've been around since, the mid-90s. Is it something we can get away with? And we're talking about a game, that came to mobile, that launched on Xbox Live Arcade as an Xbox Live Arcade exclusive before it did make its way to a bunch of other platforms. And a game that was cooperative, that encouraged multiplayer. These are things that would have been unheard of, not just because they were impossible when Tomb Raider first came out, but you wouldn't have at all traditionally associated even wanting those things as a consumer base, let alone whether they would work with Tomb Raider at all. But work they did. Lots of people love this game. I remember it very fondly. And of course, Lara Croft and the Guardian of Light coming out in 2010 from Crystal Dynamics would be the last game they would do before the relaunch, quote-unquote relaunch of Tomb Raider, that was 2013's brand new Tomb Raider reboot. Reboot's a funny word because the new Tomb Raider from 2013 doesn't really feel like it fits as a reboot or a remaster. It's sort of a reimagining. It's taking the elements of that property, and yes, you could be like, we're moving back in time to when Lara Croft's first adventure, where she becomes the Tomb Raider, before she'd really inhabited that title, before she was gun-toting and murdering dinosaurs. Can you murder a dinosaur? I don't know. Picking up 3 years after Angel of Darkness left off and doing Legend, Anniversary, and Underworld was a partial risk for Crystal Dynamics. I mean, they'd been handed the brand, so they had to do something. So the fact that they came out of Legend with Metacritic scores that were around 8s, and like most people being like, yeah, this is pretty good. I mean, it's a terrifying thing 10 years after the first game to be handed a property and trusted to do right by it. But they took calculated risks and did interesting things with those games. There was a lot that was new there. For both fans and gamers at large. There was also an entry point with Lara Croft and the Guardian of Light. Sometimes it can be a little inundating with franchises this big to figure out when you can get in. Metal Gear is another excellent example where you look at it and it's like, do I need to go all the way back? Now, of course, that's a game that's far more delicately pulled together and story heavy. That is not to say not melodramatic and deeply complicated, but you feel like you should be following along. Uncharted's kind of similar. Yeah, Uncharted and Tomb Raider, of course, share a lot of commonality. Uncharted feels like a franchise where you could kind of come in where you wanted to, but there's sort of a voice being like, should I go all the way back? Now, Lara Croft and the Guardian of Light from 2010 and 2013's Tomb Raider both did the interesting thing where they framed themselves as really good points to gather in people who didn't consider themselves Tomb Raider fans. Probably, like me, looked at Lara Croft and were like, yes, baller, get it, queen. I don't think we were saying any of those things in 2010. We probably, or I shouldn't be saying them now. But anyway, it was like, okay, well, did you not get here in 1996? Don't worry, we're trying something new. And again, Tomb Raider was taking this whole new perspective on things. It threw us into a different era of what it meant to be Lara Croft. And while that's definitely been controversial, not everyone signed up for the story or was there for it, but a lot of people enjoyed seeing different sides of Lara, and if they found themselves invested in the deeper story side while still getting what was really mechanically interesting gameplay. And that is what's earmarked lots of the greatest Tomb Raider successes. It's definitely the world and the vibe and the heart and soul of, Tomb Raider. But it's also, these are technically impressive and technically very fun games. And Tomb Raider was the biggest risk that Crystal Dynamics had taken since they took over the brand from the dying husk of what poor core design had left in 2006. And largely, they were very successful. They did something really interesting. And then we got Rise of the Tomb Raider in 2015, which, controversial, is probably my favorite Tomb Raider game. In the same sort of way that I think Mass Effect 2 is my favorite Mass Effect game, it improves on a lot of the stuff from the original. In this case, I think the story heads in a more interesting direction because a lot of 2013's Tomb Raider is like a prologue to her becoming the Tomb Raider. It's very much a whole game that I feel like is chapter one. And it sat quite nicely in the genre while still managing to innovate and keep the heart of Tomb Raider alive. And I think Rise of Tomb Raider pushes things a bit where we sort of get to go back to it being quite closely tied to her independence, her having a lot more capability just in and of herself and feeling like, the Tomb Raider we know and love. I think there was an element of kickback for some old school fans with the 2013 reboot, where just like the vulnerability of Lara felt a little like, that's not our girl, or like that's not our girl yet. And I think there's something lovely about that and lovely about that establishing element, and Crystal taking the huge risk to just run everything back to the beginning was definitely worth it, and I think was ultimately successful. But I think Rise of the Tomb Raider is where things got established. It was also so technologically impressive for the time. For 2015, you'd be hard pressed to find a more gorgeous looking game. The snowy environments were particularly impressive. There was so much here. There was just an enormous package. It felt like a true AAA game. There was just so much to tumble into as an action adventure. I think the term action adventure as a genre can feel kind of nebulous. It becomes this catch-all of anything that has elements of platforming, role-playing, but not to the extent where it has stats and things like that, like little progression mechanics, but not so much that we'd actually have it fall into a strategy genre or RPG genre or anything like that. There was also the uptick of stealth, where instead of stealth because you were vulnerable and screwed, there was stealth for stealth's sake. And then Shadow of the Tomb Raider took stealth for stealth's sake a step further. And that game was controversial. Oh boy, Shadow of the Tomb Raider. I kind of like Shadow of the Tomb Raider. The puzzles, some of which were unnecessarily obtuse. I didn't mind Lara being in her villain era, to be honest, but it was such a letdown after Rise. Because, I mean, personally, like, Rise was such a 9, and it's rough to see a game tumble down at the end of its trilogy. It's, again, we can harken back to a Mass Effect sort of syndrome. So Shadow of the Tomb Raider was really just another victim of that bloody Avengers game. Poor Crystal. So after doing a really good job with Tomb Raider ever since they took it over, the team was pulled off that, probably since they've proven that they could do a really good job and do a really good job with something that was already beloved and fragile as because that would be so easy to just fumble and go sideways. Like Tomb Raider and Marvel's Avengers being properties that were already beloved, already held super dear by these enormous, very devoted communities. So I suppose what Square Enix thought was that Crystal Dynamics were the team to give Avengers to. So because they did that, that meant that the third game fell to sister studio Eidos Montreal. And that's why Shadow of the Tomb Raider was only okay. And I feel kind of bad for Crystal Dynamics because you were never going to have a good time being chucked a Marvel game, or at least based on the number of directions I can imagine they would have been pulled between the expectations from the IP holders to publishers. That's a rough gig, and that's a shame. Avengers wasn't even awful. It was just average. It was just super average. I played it, and I happily put it down after like 4 hours. That's such a shame. I want to give Crystal the benefit of the doubt, but game probably could have been a lot better than it was. Crystal Dynamics are, of course, now in the works to be doing the Perfect Dark reboot. So hopefully that ends up being good. Presumably, if they're able to work any amount of magic like what they did with Tomb Raider, that's a possibility. But I would be massively hesitant to speak on that one, and we'll have to wait until we see more. But now that they're on Perfect Dark, then they're probably not going to be doing Tomb Raider. Also, Embracer Group bought it all up in 2022. You know Embracer Group, who now own everything? It's like the Coca-Cola of video games. If we're rolling out first party, if we're not talking just straight up PlayStation, Nintendo, and Xbox, then it's just Embracer. Have everybody under the sun. So they now own the Tomb Raider IP. So it will be up to them if we see more from the series and who we'll be getting it from. So let me know what you think about Tomb Raider. Which are your favorite Tomb Raider games? Which ones don't you like? Do you like the Crystal Dynamics games, or do you think they don't stand up to the Core Design games? I always look forward to seeing what you guys have to say about it. And it will be really interesting to see with all of you where the franchise goes going forward. So let me know what you reckon. Let me know if you want to see big swings or you reckon they should get back to any of their roots. It's always an interesting conversation. Anyway, take care, and I'm sorry this was so long, but I loved keeping you company. So catch you next time.